Um, so I'm here to talk about some big data solutions for content owners. So a lot of the previous speakers have been really talking about services and cloud and different things like that. So I'm going to look at a couple different aspects of it. For those of you who are familiar with Front Porch Digital, Front Porch Digital was actually just acquired by Oracle back in September of last year. So this is now the Digital Media Solutions group within Oracle. Great opportunity for us to certainly grow our platform and grow our business. And I was the CTO of Front Porch Digital for 10 years, responsible for all the product innovation and development. And now I'm taking on a global business development role within the Global Media Solutions group. So, why is this interesting to anyone? Well, Oracle, for example. So right now we're estimating that about 37.5 exabytes of data, that's thousands of petabytes for calculation purposes, in 2013 will grow to somewhere around 125 exabytes by 2017. This is an IDC study that showed this type of growth. And predominantly what we're talking about here is, a modest growth in structured data and really more accelerated growth in unstructured data. So a couple of the previous speakers really talked about this and the challenges surrounding management of this type of assets that could be coming in from field shoots and production and whatever else, or oil and gas, seismic data, geospatial data. Really doesn't have to be media and entertainment specific. And really when we look at handling of this, traditionally structured data typically gets dumped into a large database, and unstructured data typically is handled as a digital archive of some sort. Again, not specifically just to media and entertainment, but certainly large amounts of large data is really the key value proposition here. If we look at what's driving the investment in storage and archiving within different environments, media and entertainment, I guess most specifically, you'll see that primary concern around storage growth is really around archiving. So a lot of money is being spent, obviously, on email and CRM and ERP and human capital management and those type of services. But when you're talking about large volumes of large data, it's really about archiving. And then a couple other key drivers are really about compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, retention policies around content. And a lot of it really is about maintaining that information for legal reasons longer term. And that's sort of the generic data. And of course, if you look at that as it applies to media and entertainment, you can see that the value of maintaining this data in an accessible archive is really about repurposing, remonetization, new distribution channels, et cetera. Just one more slide here to sort of position the marketplace here is really, this is the archive use cases. So over 6 billion spend now estimated within media and entertainment at a 30% growth rate. So very, very significant presence. And the real idea here is, I always say this when I'm out talking to people, we data before by the marketing folks, right? We were storing huge, back in the 30, 40, 50 were 22 gig per hour of content times 100,000 hours of a particular content owner feeding these workflows. So we've been doing this for a long time, long before any of these other environments or verticals or sectors had really embraced the idea or the challenges around that. So we're sort of perfectly positioned to enter into these markets and provide very compelling solutions to them based on our pedigree coming out of media and entertainment. So the key idea here is really we're not talking about a content graveyard. So it's not a backup application. It's not an HSM system. It's really about an active repository for data. So whether that's, RED and DPX, mastering copies, mezzanine stuff, proxies and interaction with content that way, it's really about this object-based storage infrastructure, which sort of abstracts what's happening with all your devices, so it shouldn't matter to the back-end system whether you're using RED cameras or these types of video servers or these particular film formats. The idea is basically you have this software application layer that sits and interfaces directly into all of those different devices natively, takes care of all the format handling, all the native APIs, all of the interfaces, lets your users continue to use the same tools. So if they're used to using Final Cut, let them use Final Cut. If they want to use Avid, let them use Avid. It doesn't really matter because the software should take care of all of that. And then on the back end of these solutions, content storage management solutions is big amounts of storage. So whether it's spinning disk, data tape, optical, or some combination of all of that. And ultimately, what the content storage management, or CSM, really is it's an application layer that sits between devices that produce or consume content and generic IT commodity storage, and usually runs on commodity servers as well. So very, very, very nice fit. And traditionally, all of these have been on-prem installations. So big data tape robotic systems, 10 or 20 or 50 different discrete heavy metal servers running all of this software, system admins and people that are trained on-prem to be able to handle these infrastructures. And then the value proposition really is it not only handles all of this file-based content and protects it and makes it accessible, but it also has integrations into higher level business systems as well. So, if you're looking at now big data analytics and business intelligence and content consumption patterns and viewership, all of this information is really key to stitching together a complete picture to be able to build these models out. And a lot of it is around monetization, to be honest. And then the whole idea behind content storage management is if it happens to be content, then it should be intelligent. It should handle video as video. It should be able to transcode and partial restore, randomly access DPX frames in a huge DPX package. All of this sort of content-aware capabilities, including getting down to asset analytics and metadata mining as well. So if we have this content sitting in a repository, why shouldn't we use computers and software and hardware to be able to gain additional information and maybe searchable metadata about this content as a back-end process? So pictorially, if we kind of look at this in a traditional media and entertainment environment, this is really what we're talking about. So an investment in a single infrastructure, again, traditionally this has been on-prem, feeding all of these different independent workflows and life cycles, integrating into all the native tools, the native formats that serve each of these particular workflows. But then through the content awareness capabilities of these solutions, being able to share content, interact between all of these different silos. So becoming that file-based infrastructure or that enablement layer, infrastructure as a service before it existed as a cloud-based concept as well. And then if we looked at this a little bit more deep, again, this is traditionally what we've been doing with these types of solutions. Again, a bunch of servers and software running inside the environments, some spinning disk, usually data tape robotic systems behind the scenes, although there's some companies now promoting optical storage as well for long-term preservation. The capabilities to take data tapes or optical media out of the robot and ship them over to Iron Mountain for disaster recovery and content protection purposes. And then up above, all of those workflows that you're talking about. And some of the newest ones are the OTT stuff on the right-hand side there where everybody that has content sees value in distributing it to mobile, to tablets, to Netflix, YouTube, and those types of infrastructures as well. So again, this enablement layer at the heart of the facility is what we refer to as content storage management. So all of that was nice and great, but we're here to talk about the cloud, so let's talk a little bit about the cloud. So if we look at content storage management or the concept of CSM in the cloud, what do we come up against? So philosophical challenges. There's some media organizations that say, no way. Our high resolution content is not going into the cloud, certainly never going into a public cloud infrastructure. The truth of the matter is their stuff already is in the cloud. Netflix, YouTube, Hulu, all these different mechanisms. It's out there anyways. Maybe not DPX packages, but YouTube actually supports some pretty good resolutions these days. Asset security concerns, susceptibility, vulnerability of content, not to pick any scabs, but the Sony Pictures infiltration really arguably may not have happened if that content was hosted in Amazon or in Google, for example, just because they are spending those millions of dollars per year on security and infrastructure protection. I know, sorry. Not quite as simple of a model of that, of course, much, much more complex than that. Physical data center locations, so sometimes there are sort of geographical requirements and boundaries. Sometimes when we're dealing with national archives, national repositories, they can't let content move out of country. Some data center services don't let you sort of exactly pick what country your presence or your content is being housed in. Economic risk, once I sign on and everything looks great, what does the model look like 1 year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Long-term accessibility, so what is the protection? We've seen cases in terms of immature or failed solutions with Nirvanics and other ones that some of us are aware of. Notice goes out to everybody saying you have 2 weeks to download your content and we're flicking off the lights. So what do you do, right? How do you procure a system? How do you build up an infrastructure to store petabytes of data within a day so that you can start downloading all this stuff? Proprietary implementation. So, the concept of object stores is great in principle and great in theory. But in practice, when you start now delving down more deeply into the infrastructures and the underlying technologies, there are proprietary aspects to it. So, understanding it, at least making sure that you're well educated before you enter into these types of long-term agreements, especially when you're talking about your crown jewels, ultimately. On and offboarding. So, there's a lot of mechanisms to get if you have, 10 petabytes of data in your on-prem system and you want to move to the cloud. Amazon S3 lets you ship, I don't know, hard drives, or maybe some, I know LTFS or SNIA is working on an LTFS bulk uploading capability. But I would actually say that that's probably should be less of a concern than the reverse. So after 3 years, your CFO changes his mind. He says, well, we don't want to do OpEx anymore. We want CapEx, for whatever reason, whatever fashion. What do you do to reverse the process? So before you get into the agreement that says, here's all of my data, make sure that you have an understanding of what you do when you want to disconnect and bring your content back on-prem or move it to another provider, of course. Deep device integration, so I'll talk a little bit about this. The concept of simple storage really doesn't fit in these types of environments, because what you need then is you have this dumb object store, very powerful, very scalable dumb object store, but now you need an application layer on top of that really gives you this deep integration, the capabilities, or what a lot of people unfortunately are doing is you're building your own solutions to run on top of these types of public cloud environments, which in themselves can become a huge demon in the end of the days. And the key message here is really simple storage is simply not enough. It's just not the capabilities that you're looking for when we're talking about this types of repositories. So if we look at content storage management as a service these days, there are scalable private cloud-based solutions available right now. We happen to be one provider of these types of solutions. So again, the same capabilities that we've built into these on-prem environments, but now available as a pay-as-you-go service in a private cloud node. So again, tier 3 data centers around the world, cages of equipment owned and operated and managed. I mean, for those of you that are old enough like me, more as a managed service really than a cloud offering, but marketing likes cloud better. It's not just simple storage. Again, this value proposition of the device integrations, the video intelligence, the analytics, the metadata mining capabilities, really built for big data archiving, distribution, and long-term preservation. So again, this is really not about transactional storage where you might, spin up 100 terabytes of S3 storage for a global production, and unify it. It's really about an act of long-term engagement where this is protecting and preserving and making accessible your crown jewels, but not, again, as a content graveyard, not as a simple in, really about an active archive type solution. Geopredictable, physical on and offboarding, mitigation. I wouldn't say that, elimination of security risks, but certainly by best practices, MPA guidelines, encrypted links, physically partitioned user space, encrypted storage, these types of mechanisms are in place. And one of the key offerings here is because these services tend to be built on data tape, there's never been a case where a virus has infected a data tape. There's never been a case where the data on a data tape has been lost unless it's been physically damaged or wrecked. There's a lot of security and protection in the data tape being on a shelf, 2 meters from the data tape drive and not online all the time. Quickly accessible, very, very quick access to first byte of data, but protected because of the actual storage infrastructures that are being used. Open APIs and deep third-party integrations, of course. This is an interesting one. So price aligned with public cloud. So this is really the key value proposition. Of course, there's premium services. There's ways that you can increase SLAs by subscribing to replication services and global distribution services and some other cloud providers. But really being able to understand that it is a cost competitive world out there. Somebody's not going to subscribe to a service that's 3 times more expensive than a competing one just because. Maybe there is that level of value prop, but if we can bring the same value proposition and keep it in line with the pricing of public cloud solutions, it obviously becomes a much easier conversation to have. Things like 100% content durability. Those are not necessarily claims that you'll see with a lot of public service providers either. And one thing I want to mention just quickly here is about AXF, the Archive Exchange Format, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. AXF is the first standard that defines the way that systems like ours, like other storage providers, store data regardless of the storage technology. So when you're talking about an object store, an object-based storage model, this is really what AXF is. So AXF physically instantiates an immutable object on whatever different tape technology, disk technology, cloud technology, and regardless of the storage infrastructure, the AXF structure is identical regardless of the technology. It abstracts the underlying operating systems, it abstracts the underlying file systems, it allows you to encapsulate metadata, put in different identifiers like IDER, UMID, asset IDs, all of that can become metadata that flows along. And because this was developed in tandem with some preservation organizations like the Library of Congress, it also includes a lot of preservation characteristics as well, so that if you are looking for longer term accessibility, guarantees of interoperability, and no vendor lock-in. So ultimately, if a system like ours is storing data in AXF, any system that complies to this exact same standard can access, read, and write that same data. So there's some more information that you can actually find at openaxf.org as well. So I won't spend too much time on this. So what we're offering as content storage management as a service, or the concept of content storage management as a service, are really a few different workflows. We were talking about an active archive. So disengaging that physical heavy metal implementation inside of the environments, implementing just a simple edge appliance that sits in the environment. And I think one of the previous presenters was talking about this concept of, this box that makes it look like you have a whole lot of storage, but half of it or all of it tends to be in a very protected cloud environment. The nice thing about that is it really abstracts the facility now. It almost gives you this elasticity to the facility that appliance could be at the main facility, or it could be moved to any other different facilities, or included at many different facilities, giving you a globally federated repository and accessibility to all of your content regardless of where it is. And global federation is part of this as well. So not having to worry about what content's on-prem, what content's in the cloud, what content's at each of my different facilities. Let the software manage all of that, and just through the same REST APIs expose out access to all of that information, set up SLAs to deal with content replication, content distribution, content transcoding, formatting, reformatting, delivery to different platforms and things like that. And this kind of leads nicely into actually a couple of our customers are using content storage, our cloud-based service, as business continuance, where they originate programming out of one of their facilities. All of the high-resolution content is actually copied up through this edge appliance into the cloud, protected there, and then through a business continuance partner, they play out those channels in tandem in real time. So really, really nice infrastructure that just really wasn't possible even just a couple years ago. So really, really nice environments. So this is not to say, obviously, that there aren't values to public cloud, of course. We all know that there's extreme value in public cloud. But if we look at the aspects of private cloud services, built by domain experts specifically to serve the market, CSM capabilities, highly secured and highly protected private environment, massively scalable storage, so those type of characteristics are similar. This concept of active archive is really key. So in environments that we're talking about where we deal with these type of environments, we're storing a movie asset once, and we might restore that asset 1,000 times in the history of it. So it's not just about a backup that we have this content off. This is really the active repository where you're repurposing that content. It's feeding into production workflows. It's feeding into content distribution and things like that. Launch a new service, click on a button in an API or in an application, and all of a sudden now you're feeding out content to that environment as well. It could replace, so obviously this idea of moving to an OpEx model from a CapEx meets or exceeds public cloud durability, uptime, and SLAs. Elastic storage with simple on and offboarding. Again, media shipments is a nice, easy way to move it. And if that media happens to be an AXF format, it can come in from any system. It doesn't have to be, there's no vendor lock-in there at all. Open APIs, of course, and AXF. But then if we look at public cloud services, there's many providers to choose from. There's a level of commoditization of those types of services as well. There's a lot of value adds that are now building out with ecosystems and things like that. Massively scalable compute resources is a key value prop there. App ecosystems, elastic resources, so not having to make long-term capital plans, being able to sort of, turn the valve up and down as you need additional resources, additional compute power. Powerful production and collaboration tools. You know, it's very easy to plug in a lot of applications into an S3 environment or an EC2 environment and be able to interact and collaborate. Focused on simple object story. It does unfortunately have proprietary interfaces and storage, although there are some efforts to standardize OpenStack, Swift, and some of the S3 APIs. Provides a tool set, I think, rather than a solution. I think that's really a key differentiator here. We're not talking about it's more like an infrastructure, a platform, a bunch of tools that have been written, apps that run on in these types of services, but it provides a tool set that then you're responsible. You bring in another application provider to sort of stitch together into something more meaningful. And the concept here would be you can copy assets in and out of the private cloud into the public cloud to do transactional elastic compute, let's say. So, you know, you launch a new online service, you need to transcode 100,000 hours worth of your legacy content that happens to be in one of these private cloud hosted services through a 10 gig through a 10 gig backbone connection, getting it back out into S3 or an EC2 to actually do transactional compute and then move the data back into the private cloud infrastructure. So a lot of nice synergies that can exist between these. And we've been working with within the ETC, the workflow group on the media network exchange, and this is really exactly the concept. So the idea is building up an infrastructure which is based on private implementations of CSM services in data centers around the world, tying in a bunch of tools that are very close to that data in an elastic fashion where you can build these very complex and very powerful workflows around, having the capabilities to reach out to edge productions and bring that content into that cloud environment as quickly as possible, and then building a set of tools around that infrastructure and maybe even lining up quite well with the C4 stuff that's going on there as well. And this is kind of one of the initial proof of concepts that we've been working on here, where we were hosting the infrastructures at a couple of the Equinix facilities around the world. It was leveraging our Lynx Diva Archive software in partnership with Technicolor and some Edge Productions as well. So, you know, we'll keep you abreast of this. And I think by NAB we'll have some updates on this as well. So just to sort of wrap up, if I had to, you know, talk to you about what you might want to consider, at least a checklist. Now, maybe you don't need all of these. Maybe you don't think they're all relevant, but just as a sort of a thinking point in terms of implementing these type of solutions or services within your facilities or for your customers. So we'd still advocate private cloud services. Of course, if they're cost competitive to the public cloud services, you really have nothing to lose. You get that extra layer of attention. And, you know, in a private cloud environment, you're probably a lot more significant than you are in a public cloud environment of a customer, depending on the scale of your needs, of course. Some of the SLA characteristics, redundant copies of all the assets. So everything that you come into there, it's replicated. One copy is stored off-prem. That helps us with the 100% content durability. Physically partitioned user space. So again, there's no sort of commingling of data. So your assets are your assets on your data space, let's say. This is an interesting one too, automatic migration of to new storage technology. So one of the services that we were able to launch as part of this solution was really the capabilities that if you were on, let's say, LTO4 today, you can actually ship us your LTO4 media. We would migrate to LTO6. And let's say over the 3 years or 5 years that you were leveraging the service, we would migrate to LTO7, LTO8. And when you decided that you no longer wanted to be in the cloud or you wanted to move to a different service, we can pack up all of your assets in AXF, open standard format, on whatever the current tape technology is. So saving you the generational migrations that are necessary in a lot of these types of environments. And despite what, I have a whole nother presentation on this, but despite what anybody tells you, you will absolutely have to migrate your data no matter what type of storage technology. So don't believe what anybody's telling you. And if you have 5 hours, I can give you another presentation. Again, we think that the AXF, SMPTE AXF standard is a key thing here. It's a very, very important aspect for the long-term protection and accessibility to your content. Proxies and generation like that. So, you know, you might have this huge asset repository that sits in the background, but maybe if you can access those assets through a standard web browser and be able to frame accurately browse content, maybe your producers or your directors are logging in and looking at your dailies on a tablet or something like that. So having that infrastructure understand that content and video and audio data, being able to transcode, being able to generate these frame accurate proxies to feed a lot of low resolution workflows. Again, getting back to the ETC media exchange that we're talking about, that's really what the key is there, right? So you're logging in, you're doing 90% of your work in low res, And when you hit the button, the render engines are actually running in a cloud-based environment. So you're not actually heavy lifting, moving the heavy data and doing the heavy lifting. You're doing the predominant amount of work using proxies of the content. Again, accessibility through a web-based MAM front end, whatever tools that there are that your users or customers are used to using. Direct integration with devices. So you want to plug in a Final Cut system today, an Adobe system tomorrow, an Avid system the day after. You know, whatever tools that you need to satisfy your workflows are key here. So having that capability for direct integration. This is a big one. So, you know, Amazon Glacier is a fantastic service, but you know the SLAs talk about 5 hours to first byte of data minimum. So you know it's a nice deep archive. It's a nice storage pit. It's way better than Iron Mountain, for example, the data tape sitting on a shelf or a USB sitting on a shelf. But what we're talking about here again is this concept of an active archive. You click on something, you need something, and within a couple seconds, it's streaming out to your facility wherever it is in the world. The content-aware features, so timecode-based partial restores, frame-based partial restores for DPX assets, things like that are value adds. Lifecycle policy engines, federated views. So as these media enterprises and these production environments become more and more globally distributed, use external providers, Technicolors, Deluxes, being able to globally federate and show you a unified view of all the content, and then being able to do all the heavy lifting transparently in the background. So if I'm an editor and I'm sitting on my Final Cut Pro station and I'm using this web front end and I want this 10 seconds of this high resolution asset, I don't need to worry about where it is. Let the software figure that out, route it to me the best way that it possibly can in whatever format I need it in. So maybe it's a DPX asset, but I need it in XD cam. All of that should happen transparently in the background. Let the creative people be creative and let the hardware and software do the difficult stuff in the background. End-to-end checksums for content authentication. So, you know, every time something is touched, it should be authenticated, and not at the object level, but at the file level. So if you're talking about a DPX asset that might be 500,000 files and 250 metadata elements within that, every single one of those should carry a checksum of its own. And the idea there is, again, to the point that I mentioned before in my question was, just because one bit of one frame of DPX is bad, well, I'd rather have that than lose the entire asset. So it's very, very key. And that's another feature of AXF where we can individually compartmentalize this data. So even though it's stored as an object, it doesn't destroy your capabilities for random accessibility, going in and pulling out pieces of data and pulling out indices and metadata. It's all characteristics that we've designed into it. Open APIs, so whether they're S3, REST, or if there are some other types of APIs, ways that you can tie in your tools, again, so not forcing you to move away from tools that you're using in those environments today natively. On and offboarding, again, offboarding just as important as onboarding. So the capability to do bulk media shipments with existing technologies today. So again, AXF has this capability built in. I know that SNE is working on an addendum to LTFS also to be able to handle bulk content shipments and onboarding and offboarding. Copies of assets maintained both online and offline. So again, this durability, this susceptibility of content, hacker protection, cyber warfare and everything else that could be going on. There's nothing like physical separation between the reader and the writer and the actual data to give you a high level or high degree of protection or comfort, at least, let's say. So just a little bit about Front Porch. This is our sort of global distribution map. We have about 550 installations around the world. We have close to 1 exabyte of data now under management. Predominantly, a large percentage of that right now is on-prem, although our cloud-based solution has been gaining traction in the past couple of years. We have nodes of that in the US. We have a node in Geneva, a node in Madrid, Paris, soon to be in Singapore as well. So, global distribution serving all these different territories or geographies that we serve. Just a partial customer list just with some logos. And the real value proposition that we look at is, again, back to that first point I had with whether this is on-prem or in the cloud, really that fulcrum of that media environment, the media workflow. So this enablement technology where you can tie into all of these different sources and destinations of content and different distribution mechanisms, whether they be OTT or traditional linear, being at that center or that heart and being that enablement layer to let you be creative. That's it. Thank you very much. any questions?
Questions out there? Doug, anything?
Go for it.
Can you explain how you actually achieve the federated visibility? So is it because you've already developed API adapters to, or is, say, for example, Technicolor running a similar Oracle system, or how are you seeing those assets there? And
yeah, so typically, Technicolor here in town has one of our systems on-prem. They've had it in there for a few years, well, 5 or 6 years now. It's about a 25 petabyte system. The one that they implemented, or that we implemented in partnership with them in Paris, France, was co-hosted at a telehouse tier 3 data center there. So they built up the infrastructure, and then we basically have a software layer that sits above, has native API connectivity into all of those different silos of content, and in essence exposes out the exact same APIs at the federated global view as you would at the local view. So it can either do a global federation, so across all, Technicolor obviously hosts a lot of content for a lot of different customers. So we can provide filtered views so that their applications see, their, let's say, segments of content within each of those different systems, or their tendencies within each of those different systems. Or they can have, universal and global views of everything in all of those different systems. So yeah, by native API integrations and this software federation layer that's called DivaNet.
Anybody else? And we're a strong believer, like you saw in the first presentation, in federation and governance of data so you can properly control it. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.